students will say to me like, oh, I'm a total holic about baseball, or something like that.
Oh, do you actually mean envy?
Hopefully you have less stress after this video. Hi everybody and welcome to Pagoda One's YouTube extravaganza show. Hooray, me, yes. I'm Alex from England.
I'm Swanee from America.
And I'm Travis from Australia.
And today we're going to talk about my favorite subject, your mistakes. Your terrible, pitiful English mistakes that you should be very ashamed of. And we're also going to talk about our mistakes, which we should be even more ashamed of because we are native speakers, so we shouldn't make these mistakes. But for some reason, so many people do. Travis, would you like to start us off?
Yes. So we're going to start with common learner mistakes from non-native speakers. The one that I have chosen is when referring to memory or something that has happened to a student, a lot of the time they'll say, as far as I know.
Yes.
And it's kind of like, well, yeah, but who else is going to know? Like, of course, you are the person that's going to know because it is your memory. So it should be something like, oh, I remember, or like, this is how it happened. You don't have to say as I remember because it is something that actually happened to you. Another common one is at that time. For anything in the past, at that time. But that obviously doesn't work for everything.
Yeah. Right.
And actually the first thing you said, like I notice a lot of students mix up as far as I know with as I know it or as I know them or something like that all the time.
Right.
Yeah, good examples.
Yeah, I like it. Mine is a pretty simple one, which is just confusing until and by. Right? So I hear this like so much, but specifically since we are in Korea, like specifically for Koreans, I understand it because in Korean they just have that one word, which means they can use it interchangeably as until and by. So this can be super confusing for them, so totally understandable. For example, they'll say like, oh, I have to finish this until 6 p.m.
Right.
You know, so I'm like, does that mean you're gonna work continuously on this until 6 p.m.? And they're like, no, the deadline is 6 p.m. I'm like, okay, so you need to finish by 6 p.m.
Right.
I have to explain that whole thing. Like, okay, one is like continuous process until, and then by is just like your deadline. That one I hear a lot, but usually easily fixed.
Right.
Yes.
Right. Yep, now, I've completely forgotten what I was going to say. So I just completely blanked. So mine is when Korean students use something called Konglish. Konglish is basically English words that have become Korean words, and sometimes they're used in slightly different ways. One of those words is holic, which obviously comes from, you know, alcoholic. In Korean, when you're a holic, it means like you're either a big fan of something, or I think it means that you're addicted to something. Students will say to me like, oh, I'm a total holic about baseball, or something like that. And I'm like, what? I'm like, yeah, I'm a total holic about baseball. I'm like, what does that mean? It's like, oh, I love baseball. I watch it all the time. I'm like, oh, that we don't say holic. Like, that's not an English word. Sometimes you attach it to the end of words to make a new word, like for example, chocoholic or shopaholic, something like that. But we don't say I'm a holic. Like nobody says that. But in Korean, it's quite common. In fact, I think there was a club somewhere in Hongdae called Mad Holic.
Okay.
Yeah.
What is that supposed to mean? Like, I'm
addicted. You're addicted to madness.
Okay.
Just having a great time.
Oh, okay. Like,
going crazy.
going wild.
Love a bit of pandemonium.
Oh man, it's Mad Holic in the air! Like that.
Okay.
I don't know what it means. I'm assuming that's what it means.
Yeah.
Another one would probably be SNS. Now, people do say SNS in English, but they don't use it as commonly as they just say social media. Blame social media. Is social media ruining your life? Should you keep your kids away from social media? Nobody says, should you keep your kids away from SNS? People don't say that. But in Korean, people say that quite a lot. Because it sounds like an English word, a lot of students will just say SNS to me. And honestly, the first time I heard that, I didn't know what they were talking about. Because what they really mean is social media. Yeah, there's kind of this gray area where people aren't really sure. But yeah, a lot of Konglish words, students will use them mistakenly so.
I feel really bad for them too, because the confusion comes from also like what the different English speakers say. Because actually when I heard Korean people saying aircon, I thought that this was Konglish because we don't say aircon in America. Then I discovered that like, yeah.
We use it in Britain.
Right.
Yeah.
Same in Australia.
Yeah, so I was like, oh, I'm the one who doesn't say it. Usually we just say AC or air. Yeah,
Right.
turn on the air. Like, yeah. I was like, oh, so yeah, the English learners, they definitely have a hard time. For some people, like an American teacher could tell them, like, oh, don't say that. And then like someone could take your class and then you're like, aircon.
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's definitely confusing.
Now, obviously no one's perfect, and you know, sometimes even English speakers don't really understand English that perfectly. And that can be for any reason, you know, education, upbringing, whatever reason. So there are words that even English speakers will use interchangeably that should not be used interchangeably. But again, we get into that gray area of, because so many people use them in that way,
Right.
does that mean the definition has changed? One of those is envy and jealousy. Envy is when you want what someone else has. Jealousy is when you have something and you want to keep it to yourself. But people often say jealousy when they mean envy.
Right.
However, you probably won't hear people using envy to mean jealousy. As an English teacher, I often hear people doing this, and like, I have to stop myself from being like, oh, do you actually mean envy? Because I know people are going to look at me and be like, I hate you, shut up.
Yeah, that's so true. That's a good point, because like sometimes so many people just say jealousy.
Yes.
So it's like, if I were to say like, oh, I envy you, like it almost sounds weird that I'm saying envy, even though it's the correct way in that situation.
It almost sounds like too much, like
Right.
too formal,
Right.
too serious.
Yeah.
It adds like this extra layer to it that I think a lot of people might actually be uncomfortable with.
It does sound really formal. That's a good point. My common mistake that I don't like making this mistake, even though I do as well, but the difference between lie and lay.
Okay.
Yes. This is going like with the jealousy and envy. It's like almost the same exact thing. Like people just use lay for like everything. Like they're like, I'm laying down. Like I'm laying down in bed and I lay the pencil down on the desk. But in reality, you should say I'm lying down in bed, right? And then I lay the pencil on the desk. But at the same time, yeah, if you say like I'm lying down, it almost sounds like really formal. It's like not, you know, it's like not common. People just say like, oh, I'm laying down, you know, I'm chilling. That one I hear a lot, even like pretty much all my friends make that mistake. But like, is it really a mistake now? Yeah, it's like really blurry. Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. Like, a lot of this stuff becomes so common that it becomes like natural English.
Yeah.
So one really, really typical example of that would be the difference between less and fewer. If you go to any supermarket in America or England or presumably Australia, you will see something that says 10 items or less. And this is incorrect grammar, because less is for non-countable things. Less sugar, less sand, less water, etc. But every native speaker does this. Every native speaker says, oh, there's less people here than before. We are hiring less workers this year, like something like that. Everybody does this, but now that I'm an English teacher, it makes me twitch every time I hear someone say less plus countable noun.
I think the important thing to remember with English is there is going to be a huge difference between like written English and spoken English. I sometimes say this to students who get super stressed out about grammar. I'm like, grammar is really important, but it's always going to be more important for written English. Spoken English, once you are comfortable with the language, you can kind of break the rules a little bit.
Right.
Because that's what native speakers do. We do it all the time. We've got things like slang, we've got, you know, acronyms, we've got shortened words that just change the playing field completely. So I think if you're getting super stuck on something, relax a little bit. Because even native speakers make mistakes. So,
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
There's no like really right or wrong, but you know, as English teachers, we will teach you what is textbook, I guess. But yeah, definitely nothing to be super stressed about.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Hopefully you have less stress after this video.
Someone's gonna be like, I have fewer stress now. Thank you, Alex.
Alright. What grammar mistakes did we make in this lesson? Let us know in the comments, guys. And also, as always, don't forget to
Like.
Comment.
subscribe, hit that bell, make sure that you learn English, and happy summer, I guess. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.